Hey, good morning, everybody. Hopefully in North Dakota, certainly in mine out watching on Facebook Live. I wanted to come to you today to discuss the term limits measure that's on the ballot. Will be listed as Measure 1 in North Dakota on the ballot for the November election. Now, I'm going to go through a couple notes here. I want to make sure that I've got everything accurate, and I'm going to be looking at some notes and not consistently at the camera. So I want to give that little bit of a caveat before I begin. I'm asking everybody as they go to the polls to be an informed voter. We should do that every time we vote. I'm certainly asking for that to be the case this time around. Measure 1 is a constitutional amendment that is on the ballot for the citizens to vote, the residents of North Dakota to vote on. It takes a 50% plus one vote for passage into the Constitution for any measure that received enough, whether it was referred by the legislature or if there was a citizen petition to get enough signatures to put something on the ballot. This makes the ballot, and so this would be amending the Constitution only by a vote of the citizens of North Dakota, and it's a 50% plus one threshold. Now, in full disclosure, I am serving as the Assistant Majority Leader currently in North Dakota, and I am on the ballot for my fourth term in November. So I want that to be understood. I am not here trying to circle the wagons and say, well, as a legislator, we think this is good or we think this is bad. I want to give the information and let you make a decision on how you would vote. As far as I'm concerned, the decision about me running has always been and will be based on two things. My personal decision within my life, if I want to continue to run, and the decision of my constituents in District 5 here in Minot. That's always been the two thresholds that I weigh as to whether or not I'm going to return in the legislature. Now, I want to mention it is hard to find candidates. It's hard to find candidates in the current environment in North Dakota and across the country. And we all know a number of reasons why that is. But I have numbers to prove how difficult it is to find candidates in North Dakota. In the North Dakota House of Representatives, there are 94 seats. 80 are currently occupied by Republicans. 14 are occupied by Democrats. Because of redistricting, there's a couple sub-districts in North Dakota. There are 66 seats up for re-election in the House this year. 66 seats. Currently, there are 29 Democrats when there should be 66 running for those seats. There are 62 Republicans running for those seats. There are 2 independents actually on the ballot across North Dakota. So there are 66 seats available, yet the Democrats could only fill 29 candidates. The Republicans only filled 62 candidates. There are 13 unopposed House Republican candidates running for the first time. 13 House Republican, what we'll call freshmen, first-time candidates, are guaranteed to be seated in the legislature without competition on the ballot. There are also 22 legislators, Republican, Democrat, currently in the House that are not returning for a variety of reasons. So 22 currently seated positions not returning, whether they got defeated in the primary, they didn't win the endorsement in the convention, they may be running for another office or simply retiring. The numbers look very similar in the Senate. There's 47 Senate seats. There are 40 Republicans and there are 7 Democrats currently seated. There are 32 seats on the ballot. Only 13 Democrats are running for those 32 seats, 31 Republicans running for those 32 seats, and again, there are 2 independents. In the Senate, there will be 8 new senators that don't have competition. Of those 8, 2 of them are House members that are moving over to the Senate unopposed, and there is 1 running against an independent. So the numbers are a little bit different in the Senate, but they're guaranteed senators, first-time senators, that don't have competition on the ballot. And in the Senate, there are 9 not returning for a variety of reasons. Here's where it really matters. Of those people not returning, the House Majority Leader is not returning, the Senate Majority Leader is not returning, the Senate Minority Leader is not returning, the Appropriations Chairman in the House not returning, the Appropriations Chairman in the Senate not returning, and the Speaker of the House not returning this session. So those are the stark numbers that we're looking at. By math, if term limits were to pass, likely the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader and the Chairman of committees will be appointed, short term will be appointed to be the citizens' voice in this state after their first and only re-election. The term limits that are on the ballot say 8 years, which is 2 terms for House and Senate. And so if that were to pass, all the leadership will change over every 4 years minimum in both chambers. And not just the leadership and the majority and the minority leadership, but the chairmanships, especially in appropriations, will likely come from people that have never served in that kind of capacity before. Now, what that's going to do, in my opinion, is going to necessarily shift the power, the institutional knowledge, to people that are not the voice of the people, agency and department heads, executive branch, and lobbyists. And to be clear, it is crucial for us to be successful in the legislature to be able to rely on the input of agency and department heads and lobbyists. The term bureaucrat sometimes has a bad connotation. Certainly lobbyist has a bad connotation nationwide. It's important that we rely on good people in North Dakota for their input. But you're going to shift the power, the voice of the people in the legislature over to the unelected voice in the executive branch and the lobbyist industry. That will happen necessarily with the passage of term limits. The term limits sound great, but we are a citizen part-time legislature. And we hear that a lot, the part-time legislature. 80 days every 2 years by the Constitution. Now, 80 days means that's our ability to change law. That doesn't mean that we're not working in the interim. Over the last 5 business days, I've had 4 interim committee hearings, all in Bismarck, and I've had 3 meetings in the last 5 business days with groups, including WSI, and in discussing things that are going to be coming up next session and trying to get the history of how we got where we are. So I'm not saying that we are full part-time. 80 days is our ability to change law. So we are meeting in the interim, and we are busy at the end of the interim as we lead into elections. But we are a citizen part-time legislature. So I've thought a lot about this. How can I really make this hit home outside of the legislature? And the analogy I'm going to choose to use, I'm going to be beat up over this. I'm not saying it's the same, but think about your professional football team, your favorite team. If we put term limits, an arbitrary date, as the sole determining factor as to whether or not a player returns to your team, that's what term limits does in North Dakota, in my opinion. So you have a football team that's successful and your star quarterback is just hitting his stride in his 5th or 6th year, and after 8 years of playing for the team, he can't play for the team anymore. He must be traded to a different team, the analogy being running for a different office in North Dakota, or he must retire. Now, that one is easy to figure out, but let's back up and talk about that first contract, that rookie contract that they signed for 4 years. They're going to work hard. They want to get that second contract. They're going to do everything they can for their team. They're going to do everything to make themselves the best player they can be. But when they sign that second contract, there's potential that they don't lift weights in the off season. There's potential that they don't practice as hard. They might not be all in for the team anymore because they know no matter how they perform, the contract dictates that they don't come back at the end of that second contract. So I have that fear that if we're going to put term limits in, you're not going to get the representation of the people that you get now in North Dakota. Other states that have tried this have regretted it. Now, again, the football analogy, I know I'm going to get beat up on it, but I think it could hit home with a lot of people. So I'm asking that we don't term limit our favorite players and let job performance dictate whether or not they come back. Let the people in that district determine whether or not the job performance of the people representing them is sufficient to send them back to continue representing them. I don't want to see the voice of the people in North Dakota reduced because we abdicated some responsibility, some institutional knowledge, and some experience to people that are unelected. Not that the people that are unelected are bad, they're necessary and they provide a valuable resource to the voice of the people. But let's keep the power, if you will, in the voice of the people with the elected officials in the legislature. Now, maybe this is what people want. I guess we'll find out in November. I'm just suggesting what will happen if this were to go into place. I am leaving one thing out that matters. The governor is on this ballot as well. The governor's office. Term limit to 2 terms, 8 years. What's not included are other statewide executive branch elected officials, Secretary of State, Attorney General, Tax Commissioner. They were left off this ballot. So if this is purely focused on the governor, then I think it's a flawed measure. If it's focused on the governor and the legislature, and we can take into account the changes that will happen if this passes, and we're an informed voter, I guess we'll see where things go in November. Here's what I find very curious, and I'm going to wrap up with this. Absentee ballot and mail-in ballots started last Tuesday. We are in election season. I don't see an organized vote yes, nor do I see an organized vote no campaign. I find that very curious that we are looking at amending our Constitution and we don't see a campaign for or against, at least not an aggressive one. I always go into constitutional amendments thinking you should vote no until you're absolutely convinced yes to change our Constitution. You make the decision as you vote. If you have any questions or you have any input, I'd certainly be willing to listen to it. Send me a private message. I'll try my best to respond to everybody. Have a great day, everybody.